In Iraq, American forces are in a crucial battle. Miles and his teammates take cover in a crumbling building while firing at the enemy. Tragically, their captain is shot and dies in Miles' arms. An explosion shakes the building and a bright light fills the area. As Miles rushes out to fight, he's shot in the stomach and collapses. He glimpses strange missile-like objects and an aircraft that shines a light on him, causing him to scream before passing out. Later, Miles awakens in a strange, windowless room with gray panels covering the walls. Struggling with his wound, he manages to stand, but collapses again from heavy bleeding. Desperate, he calls for help, but gets no response. He uses his emergency supplies to clean and bandage the wound. His radio fails, and he notices the word abandon on the wall. The messages evolve to abandon all hope. Dizzy, he removes his backpack and clothes as the room's temperature rapidly rises. Panicking, he sweats profusely and begins to lose his grip on reality, hitting the walls and begging to be released. His sweat boils on the floor, making him question if he's dead. Overcome by paranoia, he draws his gun and fires at the walls. The heat becomes unbearable and he collapses, screaming in agony before losing consciousness again. When Miles wakes up, the temperature has returned to normal. He grabs his flask for water, but the room starts spinning, throwing him and his belongings around. After a few minutes, the spinning stops and Miles notices the room has shifted. Words on the walls have moved and some of his belongings are now stuck to the ceiling. Panicked at first, thinking he's in a nightmare, he eventually calms down and tries the radio again. After several minutes, he hears a woman's voice, but the connection is lost. Suspecting the room is distorting signals, he remembers his cell phone is also on the ceiling. Using binoculars, he reads the number on a sticker and carves it into the floor with his knife. He rubs his body for warmth and angrily ignores the phone when it rings again. Suddenly, an alarm sounds, the room shifts, and the phone falls. Miles grabs it just before the spinning stops. He retrieves his helmet, tucks a picture of his wife and daughter into his pocket, and chews some gum. Checking the call log, he dials the last number and hears a woman's voice. She explains she's been kidnapped and is in a spinning room. Miles asks the woman to describe her surroundings and confirms she's in a room identical to his. When she mentions that there are no visible light sources, yet she can still see, Miles realizes their bodies are emitting light. He questions her further, but she becomes scared, thinking it's a scam. Frustrated, Miles yells that he's also trapped and injured. The woman, crying, apologizes and agrees to cooperate. She introduces herself as Damsi and says she was on a highway before being kidnapped. Miles recalls his team being near a highway, and when Damsi asks if he was stationed there, he panics, realizing he never told her he was a soldier. Damsi reassures him that she inferred it from his questions and the way he spoke. Suddenly, Damsi groans in pain as Miles's dog tags are yanked back, choking him while an invisible force stretches his arms, making him drop the phone. His body floats and a bright light pulls at his limbs before dropping him. Damsi, still on the phone, experiences the same thing. Miles hears a strange noise and warns her that the room is about to move again. Instead of spinning, the walls begin closing in. Panicking, Miles tries to push against a wall but passes out from the stress. When he regains consciousness, Miles realizes the room has shrunk. Panicking, he receives a call from Damsi, who informs him that her room has also shrunk. She soothes him, helping him calm down, then curses as she forces her dislocated shoulder back into place. Miles notices unfamiliar words on the walls, and Damsi confirms they are in her room too. She explains that she wasn't physically abducted on the highway, and mentions being in Massachusetts, confusing Miles further. He questions how they're able to communicate since his phone is on a closed network and he still believes they're in Iraq. Damsi becomes anxious, pointing out that setting this up would take days, yet she's only been there for an hour. She's puzzled about why someone would target her, as she considers herself unimportant, but she recalls seeing the same strange objects in the sky that Miles did before being taken. Desperate, Miles shouts through the walls, hoping Damsey is nearby, but she can't hear him. He wonders how she got his number, and Damsey reveals it mysteriously appeared on her ceiling. Suddenly, Miles receives another call. He asks Damsey to call back later and answers it. A man speaking another language struggles to convey that they cannot win because they can't solve the equation, and therefore they must die. Before Miles can ask more, the call ends and Damsey is back on the line. When Miles asks about the equation, Damsey knows nothing. Trying to find a reason for their selection, Damsey suggests looking for a pattern as she can't believe they were chosen randomly. She reveals she's an algebra teacher engaged to a former soldier, but she seems unhappy, implying her fiancé changed after the war. Miles admits his marriage is also strained. As they talk, Miles eats his last rations and observes writing on the walls, noticing dates ranging from 1951 to 2007. He thinks these dates are meant to mess with them, believing they're fake, since for him, it's still 1991. Damsey laughs, realizing he isn't using a smartphone, and mentions social media and selfies, which Miles doesn't understand. Suddenly, the room glows and emits a noise so intense it makes Miles's ears bleed. Despite this, he checks his watch and notices the room's movements are becoming more frequent. Miles, in agony, writes down the times on his arm before passing out. When he wakes, he's trembling and struggling to breathe. The word "answer" appears on the wall, pushing him to pick up the phone. He tells Damsey there's not enough air and realizes the room has shrunk. Damsey confirms her room has also shrunk and theorizes that they're in the same room, but in different years. She asks him to draw on the wall. He makes an X, which she surrounds with a hand. In her time, it's 20,020. They discuss the fourth dimension and math, with Miles admitting his own talent. Exhausted, he collapses again. Damsey calls Miles, snapping him awake, saying she needs him. He notices his Arabic dictionary has fallen and some symbols match those on the walls. He translates the message, uncovering an equation. A little later, when Steve returns from work, he finds David hanging out by the pool with Nicole and Laura. Steve has never liked David, and some think it's out of jealousy. However, Steve begins to notice more and more strange behavior from David, which makes him increasingly suspicious. Think it's out of jealousy. However, Miles quickly notes it on his arm. Damsey then admits she has an advanced degree in math, revealing her fiancé got her a teaching job because he didn't like her talking smart. She asks if the war changed Miles, and he explains that war dehumanizes people, turning them into animals. Suspecting Damsey's fiancé might be abusive, Miles reveals his own father used to beat his mother, and he was too young to intervene. When he tried once, his father threw him onto a pull-out bed, trapping him inside. Damsey recalls the equation, and Miles urges her to scratch it onto the wall, but she struggles. Suddenly, the room shakes and intense gravity forces Miles to the ground. His knees are pinned, the bullet is extracted, and he bleeds more. Miles screams in agony, but the force soon subsides. Trembling, he reaches for the phone, cursing as he sees the cracked screen. Steve discovers that everything David said about his family was a lie. In reality, David was moved from one foster home to another until he turned 18, and now no one knows anything about him. He has no education, no home, and no job. Moved from one foster home to another. One day, Steve confronts David outside of Nicole's school, telling him that he forbids him from seeing his daughter again. David responds by calling Steve an insecure and taunting him, saying that his wife is practically ready to give herself to David. After crudely insulting Steve, David walks away. Steve an insecure and taunting him, saying that his wife. Later, after Steve leaves, David beats his chest several times and then shows Nicole bruises, claiming that Steve gave them to him. Nicole, furious at her father, refuses to listen to any explanation and leaves with David. Nicole bruises, claiming that Steve gave them to him. Nicole furious. They spend the night together, but eventually Nicole decides to return to her parents. When David drops her off at home, Nicole looks through the window and sees that her parents are still awake. She loses the desire to go inside and instead takes the car and drives to David's house. When she arrives, she notices several cars parked outside and hears loud music. Clearly, there's a party going on. Nicole looks through the window and sees her friend Margot acting strangely with Logan. Suddenly, David appears, grabbing Margot and pressuring her to say she wants to be with him. The next day, at the school cafeteria, Nicole is with her best friend, Gary, when David approaches them as if nothing has happened. Nicole shouts at him to stay away from her. David, confused, grabs Nicole by the arm, but Gary steps in to defend her, forcing David to let her go. After school, Nicole's best friend Margot visits her. They step outside to talk, and Nicole, terrified by how calm and collected Margot seems after everything that happened, realizes that she no longer knows who her best friend is. She decides to end their friendship. Margot tries to explain, saying she was high and David forced her to do everything. She begs Nicole not to abandon her, but Nicole walks away. Margot shouts after her, claiming that Nicole is her only friend. David forced her to do everything. She begs Nicole not. As Margot is walking back, David catches up to her. He confronts her angrily, using harsh words and demanding to know what she told Nicole. Margot tearfully cries out that she didn't tell Nicole anything, but somehow Nicole knows everything. David threatens Margot, telling her that it's in her best interest to fix things, and if she doesn't, it will hurt a lot. He warns her not to mess this up. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.